time. It's a part of a routine, right, that your family is engaging with you in. And, you know, being able to see yourself and your family represented. But it's also about just like raising good kids, right?
Yeah.
Like seeing the world and experiences through the eyes of other people and not only through, you know, your bubble
experience. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, you know, what's cool is, like you said, with my son, since really your books are the books that we read with him because they've come out recently. And and of course it's just like a movie. Once it's like they want to read the same book every night for a few months
over again.
And we'll have our like 3 to 4 books, and it's the same books, and you like really go in, and then they start memorizing the book and looking forward to it, and then they start to pick out, you know, the moments, and it's really sweet how the story unfolds even in their eyes, and it becomes facts and a truth to them, right? And I remember when I had honor, there was I read something that kids actually create their prejudices or their bias with others by the time they're 3. So it's like what accents they're exposed to, what types of cultures and communities they're exposed to before 3 really kind of helps them. It sets them up to be open or closed. And so it really is up to us at a young age, at the earliest ages, to read to our kids and expose our kids to other types of folks that have different types of experiences, just so they are fully, you know, well-rounded, open people.
Yep. Yeah. Right. And just good people, right? Like empathetic, compassionate people. We had a lot of these conversations, thankfully, I think coming out of, you know, last summer with the BLM protests, where I think a lot of white parents were finally, you know, kind of thinking about, you know, how do I have these conversations, or how do I find tools to start these conversations? You know, I think for many of them, you know, thanks to, again, the work of Black activists and others that have been doing that work for years, we're saying, look at your bookshelves, right? Like this work starts in your home.
In your home.
And like you said, it's also, how do we talk about differences, right? Is it something that we emphasize in a positive way and celebrate, or is it something where we try to find sameness first, right? And diminish differences in a way that doesn't allow us to celebrate it and recognize it. And worse yet, right, think of difference as something as other or weird or negative, you know? I like this.
I would say even with like, I mean, for me, I've been a pretty open person my whole life, and I've made a point to, for myself, even at an early age, reach outside of where I was raised or how I grew up. I think because I always felt like I didn't fit in with my family necessarily. You know, I always felt like kind of an odd person inside of you know, my family's quite, you know, sort of like conservative, and you know, and they just have like, you know, values that are, you know, they're good people and all of that. But I was always quite rebellious and felt like I didn't quite fit in. And so I was always kind of reaching out to different cultures and communities and finding connections in other places. So when I became a mom, food is also, you know, beyond books.
Same.
Food and traveling with my kids. I've been traveling with my kids, all of them really, since they were 4 months old. I've taken them with me, and I forced them to experience different types of food. I never say anything is weird or disgusting or even if it is different, it's like, just try it.
Right.
You never know.
Exactly.
You know, and just having a more positive attitude even on something that you may or may not be familiar with, just being open and having like a more, I guess, inclusive and a positive tone in how you talk about it, that will then really make such an impact on the way that your kid experiences differences and different things.
Exactly.
And so I think that is something that I made a very concerted effort in doing with my kiddos. So, you know, I think consistency also helps.
Yes,
but I do
exactly. Like,
appreciate your books.
it
I
can't
just
just
say,
be one weekend conversation, or as you were talking about travel, like it can't just be like one trip to wherever, a different place
right.
that you're not, right? Like that's not enough. It is, and I know that we're all busy and tired, and there's a lot that day to day we're all, you know, juggling, but it really is about showing up with that like intention. And as you said, consistency. And also it doesn't have to be a big thing. I think it's important for people to be encouraged, like to meet people where they are, right? And what I think was most interesting to see from some of the conversations with parents coming out of the BLM protests were, you know, folks were waking up to like, oh, we don't really have those types of conversations in our house, you know. And if it is the first time that you're trying to do something that you've never been done before, it's okay to, you know, do what works for you, right? Do it incrementally, you know, find books, right? If conversations are harder to sort of just start, right? There's just so many, and now thankfully there's so many resources now coming out of that summer, right? That people were compiling lists and just so much information to help people do that.
Yeah, it's also like when you do have a book or an article that you could read, or you know, even watching a movie or documentary or any of that, you know, I do try to, when there are some difficult um, things that are being tackled, even in entertainment or in a book, to like stop and like talk to my kids. And they're always like, Mom, why are we talking about this? Let's just
right.
finish it. And I'm
You're
like,
like,
I know,
okay, pause the
but
movie.
like,
It's like,
let's
yeah.
just take 5 minutes. Like, what do you think about that? Or did you
Right, right,
know
right.
that this, you know, um, even just
I do that too.
explaining
I
to
mean, movies
them.
is a great example, but we do that. This is kind of what started me on the path of wanting to write a book, which is that I'm reading a book and I, you know, maybe it's my fault, like for not kind of screening it ahead of time, or like assuming that, you know, it's a iconic, like, you know, piece of children's literature, or somebody else recommended it. But I'm like turning page by page. I'm like, huh, there's no women in this book, or,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know their names, or why are all the women silent and supporting characters, or, you know, so like to your point, I'll pause and say, oh, that's interesting. Did you notice that? Or, right, how do you feel about that? And it's good to do that. I mean, yeah, I'll be the annoying parent to like pause the book or pause the movie, right?
Same,
Over like,
same.
that's what happens when
It
you live in
drives
my
them
house.
crazy when they get older too. But I think,
Exactly.
you know, what's cool about even, you know, what I love about your first book is just also showing kids how activism doesn't need to be the types of protesting that I think most people think of when they think of activism, you know, on the streets, protesting with signs. Like, activism can be, you're getting a letter signed by different people in your apartment building or in your neighborhood, and you want to, you know, fight for this idea of like the playground or, you know, this community space. Like, that is activism.
Exactly.
And it can start at 9 or 8, you know, if you believe in something, why not?
Yeah, I think, you know, especially coming out of the 2016 election, where we saw, I think, more, you know, ordinary people engaging in activism and civic engagement in ways we've never seen before. At the same time, in that moment, a lot of people were, I think, asking, you know, that point that it is. Oh, sorry, am I freezing up?
You froze for a second,
okay.
But you're back.
I also am so annoyed. I'm competing with sunlight, and it's made like, I know that it's like very dark, terrible lighting. So sorry, everyone.
No, you look amazing.
But you know, that the point is, and that is from the first book, right? This line that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And the point is that activism, you know, or whatever you want to call it, right? Giving a damn, making a difference, that is available to all of us. And there are not only, you know, unique ways that you can contribute, meaning your own personal, you know, creative skills or right experiences. It also can be small or seemingly small, right? And it's just about starting somewhere. And in the first book, it is right about starting in your backyard, right? Literally looking at the courtyard of your apartment complex and deciding, you know, I see something that I would like to change, and so I'm going to go change it, you know? And I guess, you know, to kind of like tie the two books together, to me, that is the definition of being ambitious. And that is something that we should encourage, you know, especially with our girls, right, who we know will be told inevitably when they get into the working world, into the real world, you know, that they're to this or to that, or that female ambition is not a good thing. And my whole thing is like, if you're daring to, you know, challenge the status quo, or you're daring to change something or have a vision for society or your community or whatever, and decide to go do that, that is, you know, you have to be ambitious, right? Like that is something we should celebrate. And that was really, you know, the inspiration for the second book, which is realizing that's the family I grew up in. I was told, and I saw it every day, you know, I had this world view of female ambition, and that it did mean purpose and determination. And, you know, as you said, like activism, whatever you want to call it, right? It's being bold and having a, you know, dream and going after it. But realizing as I got older that, and I was actually trying to think back, like when was the first time that I perceived and was it was kind of taught, you know, by society that we think of female ambition in a negative way. And unsurprisingly, I think it was in a political context. It was, you know, I was like fresh out of college. This was 2008. I was on the Obama campaign, and I was also doing like local political stuff. And it was sort of the like, you know, talking about another woman who had political aspirations, and sort of like, oh, you know, she has political ambitions, right? It's like, oh, she's a snake, or she's calculating or opportunistic. And the point is, whatever it means, all the bullshit meaning that we ascribe to that, like we just don't do that to men, right? It is a double standard, and let's call that out. And to your very first point about just the power of kids' books, you know, as I said, I was raised in a family where nobody like sat me down and read a book to me about the word ambition and told me the definition of it. But now that I am a parent, and I've seen this in the real world, I've experienced it, I'm sure you have. And we can go down the list of all the words, right, that are used against women, and, you know, used as a critique in a way that we don't with men. I'm like, you know what? Let's sit down and define that word, and let's put it in a book, and let's read that as part of our bedtime routine, right? Like, let's call that out and claim it, and name it and claim it, and reject that, and start young. And it's just as important for your son, right, to see that, to see female ambition on pages of books, as it is for me. Frankly, I mean, I was like, I wrote this book as much for me. Secretly, I wrote it for myself as much as I wrote it for, like, you know, young readers, because, you know, we have a lot of that unlearning and relearning to do, and that we're still told that every day in the world.
Yeah, I've been told pretty much my entire life that ambition, it was a bad word to be associated with, and it's how they described women who wouldn't just kind of know their place.
Right.
It was like, know your place, know that you have to sit inside of this box, and if you dare challenge kind of where you are supposed to fit, you're ambitious.
Yeah.
And it was like a nicer way to call you a bitch.
Right. It's like settle down, right? Like, too much
like,
noise.
Who do you think you are? Kind of thing. And I, you know, I have to say that I feel like anybody who's done anything cool is ambitious. Right. Anyone who, whether it's a guy or a gal, and I don't really think that you need to even, I guess, nothing would happen if you don't have ambition.
Right.
Nothing interesting would happen. Everyone would just sort of like go through the motions and be sort of accepting the status quo and be robotic. But
right. Well, that's the whole point, that people who do use it to, you know, weaponize it and use it in a negative way, or to beat somebody back, it literally is in order to preserve the status quo. It is about preserving power, right? And it is literally, and that's kind of the, you know, the point of the book too, that language has power. And, you know, when we use that and we wield that against women, that is a tool of oppression. Like, yes, that is exactly what it is. Let's name that, right? And again, there are so many other words, but it's the point that, as you just said, like, the world, it would be preserving the status quo. And the whole point of questioning that or disrupting that is, yes, maybe making people feel uncomfortable. right? And they'll turn it right back in your face and, you know, say, oh, I asked you to be ambitious and help and, you know, be at the decision-making table, but you're doing a little too much, right? Like, stay in your lane. And
it's so true. Oh my God, it's happened to me so many times.
Right. I'm like, I can name, I mean, not, like all the time. But I have to say, and I'm curious, you know, I've really connected with you around both of us being entrepreneurs and founders. And to your very point, and again, it's, you don't have to be that to be ambitious, but I think that's also the definition of being an entrepreneur, being an innovator, right? And doing bold, interesting things in the world and not accepting it as it's sort of, you know, given to you and looking at it with a critical eye, right? To say this can be done differently or in a better way. So anyway, we know all this stuff. I joke that I want to write like a ABC book of all the words. And I could like, I'm not going to do it now, but it's a fun exercise. So like literally go down the alphabet, you know, A for ambitious, B for bossy, C for competitive, D for direct,